Before we get started, we just wanted to thank Old Republic Surety for sponsoring this episode of Let's Get Surety, as well as NASBP's virtual seminars for the third year in a row. For more information on Old Republic Surety, visit www.orsurety.com. Now, on to our show.
You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, it's Kat Shamapande. Welcome to this episode of Let's Get Surety. I have with me today my co-host, Mark McCallum, CEO of NASBP. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Sure, it's wonderful to be back again with you, Kat.
It's always good to have you. And today we're going to be talking about some contractor bonds, specifically when general contractors might need those bonds. And to do that, we have with us as a guest today, Daryl Lamb, and he is, the Regional Vice President in Portland, Oregon for Old Republic Surety Company. Hey, Daryl.
Hey, good morning. Nice to be here with you, both Kat and Mark.
Thanks for being on with us today.
Thanks.
Before we dive in, Daryl, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself, your background, and about Old Republic Surety?
Sure. Old Republic Surety. We're 35 years in the bond business this year as Old Republic, but our roots date back to 1923. So 2 more years,
Wow.
We'll be at 100 years. I've been in the business about 30 years. This is my 9th year with Old Republic. And we are...
You're just starting out in the industry, Daryl.
I am. Well, it's a great thing, and I know Mark knows this, that one thing about the surety business is we learn something new every day. So I'm going to keep doing this until I've learned it all, and I might be still a lot longer to go.
Well, as we're diving into this, with everything that's going on in the economy, does mitigating that risk that can occur with subcontracting, is it more important now than ever?
Oh, I think so. Sure, the economy, it's very, very tough, and a contractor doesn't need another problem handed to him. So if there are tools we can use to help shift that risk elsewhere and relieve the things that they've already are trying to focus on, which is to construct the project, then it's great to try to use those tools. And sub-bonds are one of those tools.
Daryl, do you think GCs appreciate what subcontract bonds bring to the table? Or is there now more of a willingness to take a look at that as opposed to kind of just deal with risk on their own?
I think it depends on the contractor.
Okay.
I've been fortunate enough where I have required sub-bonds on projects, and like insurance, it's one of those things that, do people really come back and thank you for homeowners insurance if a year's gone by and their house didn't burn down?
Right.
But I have had contractors come back to me and thank me for recommending this as a tool because a hiccup did occur and they were able to use that to mitigate that risk. And so that's a good thing. I mean, I hate that a hiccup happens, but it does happen. And because of that, it's great that we have these other tools. So I know some have become believers and come back and said, that was great that you did that. And, some people are the eternal optimists and just don't think problems will happen.
Right. And perhaps that makes construction the risky industry that it is, right?
That's right. That's right.
So if you had to tell us, the prototypical GC that should really be looking at subcontracts, who would that be?
It's usually the general contractor that is managing a lot of subs. And I think when you look at those subs, often the surety is going to recommend where a lot of the risk is, which is in the MEP, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing areas. Those are typically the larger dollar items, but sometimes it isn't about dollars. In the pre-qualification process, some of those are going to be very solid subs, and maybe it's not the best place to put their dollars to mitigate that risk. So I look at things and I always ask this question is where do you see the risk in this job? Mm-hmm. And I think back to a shopping mall years ago that I was heavily involved in bonding. There were many GCs. And of all the things, this particular shopping mall had a retractable glass sunroof. So it could open and be an open air mall, or it can close in the winter months and be closed. That's not a sub-trade I would normally think about, but for the contractor, that's one of those things that how many people can really do that?
Right.
And that's one where they decided that was where the risk was. And so even though on the whole scale of the overall mall, it wasn't the biggest dollar item, but it was unique and risky. And so they chose to bond back that sub.
So something that's unique, perhaps there's few subcontractors that actually do a particular type of work.
That's right.
Or the work maybe on the critical path. Would those be good examples?
That's an excellent examples. I said this in the article, but in speaking with a contractor just this year, I just wanted to get a feel for how he looked at his own risk and how he mitigated. And he was the one that brought this up. I didn't lead him to it. He said, as a rule, he does a lot of buildings that have elevators. And he says, I always get a bond on my elevator sub. I said, why is that? Or have you had trouble with elevator subs? He goes, oh, no, they're excellent. Yeah. They're very good at what they do. It's just that there's very few of them, and he's competing with everyone else.
Yep.
And the thing when you're doing a building is your elevator, that particular work comes later in the project. So you're looking months down the schedule and you want to make sure they show up in the window of time you need them. Another thing that elevator subs will tend to do is often ask for a large upfront payment.
Right.
Even up to 50% of the project. And so in his mind, they're holding his money and he's hoping they show up in 6 or 10 months. So getting the bond is one of those things that gives him that leverage that he sleeps at night knowing that he has that in his back pocket. And it is true that most subs are going to react to the jobs, respond better to jobs they're bonded on. So that's one example. So it's not always the critical path. Subs are also very important. And that's why we do tend to most often bond back the electrical and plumbing mechanical subs.
Right. The in terms of GCs looking at that and they're evaluating that. Some obviously have more internal resources than others. Do you see a pattern in terms of which one are better suited? For example, they may not have certain in-house capabilities, and they can get those capabilities by virtue of having a subcontract bond requirement.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, too. I think we try to provide help to the general contractor as well if they're unfamiliar with a sub. Now, sometimes these are subcontractors they've worked with for decades, and they know them well. They're part of the family, and they've done a lot of. I guess you can say that's their own underwriting. They've had personal experiences with these contractors, and they know their methods. So they feel comfortable with them. But for the subcontractor they have not had a lot of experience with, we can help them pre-qualify those subs too. And we'll often ask them to ask for bid bonds. Nothing wrong with asking for a bid bond from your subcontractors you're taking bids from. And then we'll help them review those bid bonds. Because to them, it's a piece of paper. It looks like anyone else's bid bond. But for those of us in the industry, I might be able to see that it's coming from a market that might not be a preferred market, a more non-standard. And I said, maybe this is someone you should look a little closer at.
So when you say a non-standard market, could you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Well, there are niches in the surety market too, and there's a group of the solid players that handle the biggest contractors and are what we'd call a preferred market. And then the non-standard ones are the folks who are more struggling or starting out, maybe don't have quite as strong a balance sheet. So financially, they're not as strong. Maybe these markets help them get bond credit by the contractor posting collateral or using other tools, funds control.
Right.
And those type tools help some guys get into competing for this business. I would also say that they have those tools because they pose a greater risk, and all the more reason for our general contractor to get a sub bond back from them.
So it sounds like when a contractor makes that decision to bond a particular sub, they need to do their due diligence on the surety and the strength of the surety. So where can they go to get that information?
A good NASBP agent would be very helpful, helping them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the surety, we can do the same. We can help them. We all have ratings as a surety. So are you AM Best rated A+? Are you, what's your treasury listing?
Right.
So that's the surety backing you. But there's some ways we try to get an insight on that particular contractor too. So some general contractors have great pre-qualification procedures, and they run their own, even Dun & Bradstreet, or they'll run their own credit reports on a subcontractor. Right. So we get bid bonds. We try to do our own research into the health and the strength and the experience. Is this a particularly large job for that sub? And those are things that help us make that decision on whether or not to bond it back.
Right. Right. So you had alluded to sometimes they don't know a particular subcontractor, and that may argue for requiring a subcontract bond. For a GC who may be looking to kind of expand their territory in terms of providing services, how would you characterize the importance of having subcontract bond requirements in that instance?
I think it's an excellent time to do that. If you're heading into a new territory, any ways you can mitigate the potential risks. Again, you're kind of a little bit operating in the dark.
Right.
I always view, it's funny, I kind of think of a general contractor much like the conductor of a symphony, with all the trades being the various sections of that symphony. There's a piece of music there. That's what you're trying to build. And there's all these different parts. And so sometimes you know those parts very well, but sometimes the players can be very new. So you're trying to get some direction. So I don't know where I was going with that little analogy there, but.
Well, I would think anytime you're jumping into either an unknown party or an unknown, perhaps territory or project that may be a little bit different than what you're used to, then you need to be especially concerned about your downstream risk, I would imagine.
That's right.
And then you want to get to know a party a little bit better, and maybe you do that by virtue of having that bond requirement, I imagine. So,
right.
Yeah. So that's very important. There are over recent years, although I think hopefully maybe that is diminished, you started to see some contractors with captive programs, and even some jurisdictions will allow surety captives, and that allows them to essentially self-insure.
Right.
With, I think the economy being where it is and some emerging risk, you would think hopefully then they would start to be worried about having that element of self-insurance and look to transfer that risk. Are you hearing anything about that now? Or are GCs kind of thinking more thoroughly about their downstream risks?
I think the good ones are. I think that's something they should be thinking about. And the challenge that we're always fighting with that is that in a tough economy, profitability is at the forefront of their thinking. And every time we ask them to bond back a sub, we're asking them to incur another expense.
Right.
And in their mind, potentially making them less competitive. Although I'm not sure that the cost of a bond really is going to be the difference in a bid spread. But the benefits are there. And like I say, that people have come back and said, I'm so grateful. It'd be like someone, again, insuring their home and you had a big fire. How grateful would you be for $1,000 insurance premium just saved you your $1 million home? So I do think there's a lot of value in it, and something it's a good discussion that agents should be having with their clients. And it's a great tool that we provide, surety bonds.
And what about, like, for those who want to reach up a little bit more in capacity, what will a subcontract bond program do for them?
Make their surety more comfortable. That's one thing.
Absolutely.
And I think about that even this morning. I believe we just acquired a new client today. And I was talking to one of the managers in one of the other offices. And, I hope it sounds like we have a very solid general contractor that we're picking up, but he's new to us and we don't have the experience. And this is a relationship business. And it takes a while to build that. So for my own sake, in this particular job, I asked one of the major subs be bonded back. And I don't know that I'll do that next year and after a few things, but I want to see our history together grow a little bit with me and this client. So that helps us. And they're grateful for it because the surety they're coming from didn't quite have that confidence to go to this next level with them.
Right. Awesome. So I'm a GC. I'm convinced I want to have a subcontract bonding program. Now I want you to help me convince my project owner. What is the right thing for me to say to convince that owner?
So, it's true when you bid a project, you build in your costs. And if your costs are going to include this and you have the ability to your owner say, this is better for the owner wants more than anything a successful project.
Right.
I find the best owners do. I don't think they're thinking about it just in dollars. They want it to be the best. And I think about a project I was involved with bonding the renovation of a major airport here a while back. And I know that the joint venture general contracting team that put that together, they absolutely went out and sought the best of the best subcontractors. Mm-hmm. There was no looking for, who would be cheaper? Right. They were looking for the A team. And we were able to bond several of those guys, but I just knew in their approach, they weren't looking for the cheapest. They weren't looking for anybody they hadn't worked for. They were looking for people they had great experience with in the past. And price really wasn't the object. So I think they were successful in selling that owner on that because that was I think every sub over, probably $500,000, every sub was bonded.
Oh, that's a great example where they're saying, look, you're going to get the best of the best if we can do this.
Right.
And that's nice. And I imagine, I think you alluded to this earlier, is making the pitch about the alignment of interest on that project for the benefit of the project.
Right.
which is also, I think, a powerful statement on why somebody should bond their subcontracts. What are some of the other examples you've seen recently where you've seen, whether it's, a private project or a public project? And I know in some states there are a few, not many, but there are a few that will require subcontract bonds in certain contexts. But are you seeing more of a trend in this direction on private work?
I don't know that I have seen a trend. I mean, we are seeing a return to it, and I'm sort of grateful for this, not to take a shot at something that's part of our industry too, but a lot of sub bonds sort of dried up when the substitute insurance product SubGuard came out and convinced people that they were selling a product that would take care of that risk for them. And I think what they found out is that product wasn't as successful as some had hoped, and therefore the cost of that product is increasing, and some people aren't finding it had the benefits that they thought it did. Mm-hmm. So now I'm seeing a return to sub bonding, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
There was a few years ago where this was a common thing. Some of the biggest GCs in town would regularly say, anything over 200,000, we get a bond. And then those guys bought SubGuard, and sub bonding kind of went away from at least hitting my desk. I mean, it was still in the contractor's mind taken care of in a different way. But now what I'm finding is many of those people are returning to using our product again to mitigate that risk.
That is definitely good to hear.
Yeah.
So maybe perhaps they don't want to take on as much risk themselves and they transfer it.
Right.
Yeah. That's great. What are there other circumstances that you'd like to point out when subcontract bonding really is the best path forward?
Let's see. The capacity, I hear this from some agents who bring up concerns for their clients where the subtrade, there's been an increase. It used to be the old-fashioned way was owner has a project designed, they put it out for bid, and then the contractor, all he does is build it. Here's your plans, build it. What we're finding now is a lot of the design is getting shifted to the contractor.
Right.
In some of those products, and it makes it riskier. There's some of those things, and I've had a lot of good agents point that out. They'll go through, and then they will seek for their client to let's bond this piece back. There's some design risk here, and let's make sure that we get that bonded back. And I can think of a few horror stories. Just a few. I mean, I'm not that involved in it. I remember an airplane hangar was built by a contractor. And in many ways, it was just like a big Butler building. It's just a big metal pre-engineered building, really. But the design part was the big doors that open and close, like a big garage door. Wow. How hard could that be? Except the contractor that put it on, the subcontractor that built the doors were too heavy to open.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. That's a problem.
Yeah, kind of a problem there. Yeah. And that's completely a design thing. I wouldn't even think about it, that the bigger, they're just big aluminum doors, but the bigger they get, the heavier they get. And it probably needs a different system than to open the door. And that's where you need to be an architect. That's what engineers are for. And that was a mistake. That was in the contractor's contract. They built a door. The door looked great. It didn't function properly because it was too heavy. So that's where those things that when you see that sort of design risk and you're not an architect, then it's good to shift that risk. Go ahead and.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I think you had another one earlier on when you were saying mechanical subcontractors. A lot of times there's a design component of their work as well.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's really, really important. What about the fact that on private projects you might have a mechanics liens, risk on that from further downstream parties? Do you see that as being a component of when somebody's deciding whether or not to have subcontract bonds?
I mentioned earlier that I had a contractor call me back and be grateful and thank me for asking him to bond back a sub. And that was exactly it. It's that the general contractor had paid his subcontractor, but the subcontractor did not pay his suppliers. And that's exactly what was happening, was the liens were starting to roll in. And because he bonded it back, he was able to wash his hands of that and just turn it over to that sub's surety.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds to me like there are a lot of reasons to require subcontract bonds.
Yeah.
Yes.
With the economy where it is right now and a lot of unknowns, that it even argues more so for GCs and CMs and others to really be thinking about this. Any last thoughts that you'd like to convey?
Well, we're a market that loves subcontract bonds, and we love the general contract bonds. So I'll put in a shameless plug for Old Republic Surety. We love what we do. And so this is great to be here with you, great to talk about this topic, and we look forward to writing more bonds.
Thanks so much, Daryl, for being on with us today. And I just wanted to say, you mentioned the article you wrote for us. It's in Pipeline. You can check that out. It's called Subcontract Bonds: 4 Times When General Contractors Need Subcontractor Bonds. So you can get more information from Daryl on this topic with that article. Thanks so much, Daryl.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.
Before we go, we just wanted to say thank you again to Old Republic Surety for their generous support in sponsoring this episode of Let's Get Surety. For more information on Old Republic Surety, visit www.orsurety.com.